My lifeboat, let it be full of lively souls, of loving souls. And no matter how lost at sea, or tossed by the world's tempests, its serpents, its perfect storms, let us be safe in each other's hands, comforted in each other's arms. Share our rations of food and water, courage and wisdom. Believe in unison we'll ride out, sail through the unknowns. We'll reach calm waters, the shore, dry land, our places of home, and the lives we so dearly want to live. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in from everywhere you're listening in, around the country and the world, maybe on board a plane or aboard a ship. I'm delighted you're here. I'm always delighted when you come, and I'm delighted you're here for show 162, coming to you live from the lighthoused coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more fully, more alively, more poetically. Last week's theme, if you were listening, was Off to Sleep, musings on our universally shared experience, its lights and darks, its gifts of rest and source of dreams, our raiments and rituals around it, attitudes and gratitudes toward it, and rumpuses, and what else it means to us emotionally, symbolically, and more. This week, who do you want in your lifeboat? Who would you want, literally or metaphorically? If the going got very rough, your ship sinks and you're lost at sea, cast adrift with a handful of others. Or things get dicey, maybe the world goes haywire, or as my father would have said, goes to hell in a handbasket. And who would be vital for you to have with you, around you, to help you get through the ordeal, the unknowns, challenges? Well, I've got some good waves and swells of cultural commentary, poetry, and shared inquiry for us around this theme. So put on your imaginary life vest, a Mae West, or any other life preserver if you feel the need. And let's plunge in together. Alicia Oestreicher's poem. After the shipwreck. Lost, drifting on the current as the sun pours down like syrup, sinking into afternoon. The raft endlessly rocks, tips, and we say to each other, here is where we will store the rope, the dried meat, the knife, the medical kit, the biscuits, and the cup. We will divide the water fairly and honestly. Black flecks in the air produce dizziness. Somebody raises a voice and says, listen, we know there is land somewhere, in some direction. We must know it. And there is the land, looming, mountainous, massive on the horizon, there in our minds. Then nothing but the beauty of ocean, numberless waves, like living, hysterical heads, the sun increasingly magnificent, a sunset wind hitting us. As the spray begins to coat us with salt, we stop talking. We try to remember. After the shipwreck, thank you. Alicia Oestreicher. Derek Mann, M-A-H-O-N. After the Titanic. They said I got away in a boat and humbled me at the inquiry. I tell you I sank as far that night as any hero. As I sat shivering on the dark water, I turned to ice to hear my costly life go thundering down in a pandemonium of prams, pianos, sideboards, winches, boilers bursting, and shredded ragtime. Now I hide in a lonely house behind the sea, where the tide leaves broken toys and hat boxes silently at my door. The showers of April, flowers of May, mean nothing to me, nor the late night of June, when my gardener describes to strangers how the old man stays in bed on seaward mornings after nights of wind, takes his cocaine, and will see no one. Then it is I drown again with all those dim, lost faces I never understood. My poor soul screams out in the starlight, heart breaks loose and rolls down like a stone. Include me in your lamentations. Derek Mann, thank you. After the Titanic. David Wagner, life-saving. Those arms stretching towards you, helplessly beating the waves and clutching the air, want to hang on. They want to hold you close, closer forever, not out of love, but fear of losing a way of life by drowning. No matter how reassuringly you say to listen and trust you, to relax and give in to the easy water lifting you together. That mind staring at you and at nothing can't understand why it should stop screaming. One hand is suddenly seizing you, half strangling, and one wild crook of an arm is locking around your head, and that mind is losing its mind. Not losing yours. You do what the water around you has done already. You give way. You go away from the light and air. You settle downward as if to end the world of the head and the heart, taking the other with you as far down as that body will follow into the darkness, and it lets you go. It rises again to the uncertain surface, no longer thrashing, no longer grappling or flailing out of its wits, but desperately calm. It believes you now. It's lying still while your palm is lifting it gently, almost weightless, the face aimed at the sky, the mind once more seeing and listening, remembering to believe its body can float as well as yours, that its arms and legs can begin to move surely with yours toward the land of the living. Life-saving. Thank you, David Wagner. Well, part of my inspiration for this show was a friend a while back saying of someone else that we were in company with, "Oh, I'd want him in my lifeboat." I remembered that, and I mused on it later, here and there. And then I also was thinking more recently, beyond that, my memory of a film I've seen many, many times, never tire of seeing, a classic film, as far as I'm concerned. I think others would say the same, is an Alfred Hitchcock film, 1944, Lifeboat. So Wikipedia says an American survival film directed by Alfred Hitchcock from a story by John Steinbeck. Stars Tallulah Bankhead, William Bendix, alongside Walter Slezak, Mary Anderson, John Hodiak, Henry Hull, Heather Angel, Hume Cronin, and Canada Lee. Wonderful actors. Wonderful story and filming and everything and feeling. It's set entirely on a lifeboat launched from a passenger vessel torpedoed and sunk by a Nazi U-boat. It received 3 Oscar nominations for Best Director, Best Original Story, and Best Cinematography, black and white. Well, here's just a little taste of the plot. If you haven't seen it, and if you have, go back and see it again. Very inspiring. And it's all life in a microcosm on a lifeboat. 8 British and American civilian service members and United States merchant mariners are stuck in a lifeboat after their ship and a German U-boat sink each other in combat. Willie, a German survivor, is pulled aboard. During an animated debate, engine room crewman Kovac demands the German be thrown out to drown. However, the others object, with radio man Stanley, wealthy industrialist Rittenhouse, and columnist Connie Porter succeeding in arguing that he be allowed to stay. Mrs. Higley, a young British woman whose infant child is dead when they're pulled from the water, must be tied down to stop her from hurting herself. She jumps off the boat in Porter's mink coat while the other passengers sleep. Willie is revealed to be the U-boat captain rather than a mere crewman. The inhabitants attempt to organize their rations, set a course for Bermuda, and coexist as they try to survive. It's quite a journey. Well, Hitchcock explained that the film's moral was that the Allies needed to stop bickering and work together to win the war. And he defended the portrayal of the German character, saying, quote, "I always respect my villain, building him into a redoubtable character that will make my hero or thesis more admirable in defeating him or it." Lifeboat, Alfred Hitchcock. From blogs.voanews.com by Dr. Jill Robbins. Who would you want in your lifeboat? Our American Stories episode for this week is Stephen Crane's The Open Boat. In the story, we learn about the experience he had after his ship sank on the way to Cuba. He was on the ship SS Commodore, a steamship, left from Jacksonville, Florida on December 31, 1896. He was going to report on the war in Cuba. The ship sank on January 2nd, and he and 3 men got into a 3-meter-long dinghy. They only reached land 30 hours later. We find in the story that the men help each other row the boat and give each other emotional support. I thought, as I read the story, who would I like to be in my lifeboat? How about you? From lovelifepractice.com, personal development with Gray Miller. Who's in your lifeboat? So here's just a few snippets. We're all scared, is the subtitle. There's also the simple need for us to be vigilant in our everyday life, watching for moments, not only when we can stand up against bigotry and hate, but also when we can promote tolerance. It means remembering that we're all in this together. Let's be clear. Lifeboats are not places you want to be. If you're in one, something has gone seriously wrong. No, a lifeboat is only useful in 2 ways. 1, it has the bare minimum to keep you alive for a while. And 2, it is better than not being in the lifeboat. And people in one share these 2 characteristics. They're all threatened by whatever is outside of the lifeboat, and they're all trying to stay alive. Now, before the analogy runs aground, wait, that would be a good thing. Damn it, I'm failing the metaphor game today. Let's not get into the, quote, limited resources game. We're not having to suspiciously eye each other, wondering if someone is taking more than their share, because what sustains us in this particular lifeboat metaphor is empathy. It's kindness, it's compassion, and all of those are, if finite, at least renewable resources. Here's the challenge. We aren't in the lifeboat yet. No, right now we're still standing in line as the deck is tilting, and we're looking around to see who is getting into the lifeboat with us. Now is the time when we have the choice, when we can look for the people we want to care for, who can help, or who can help care for us. Now's the time when we can see the person with the skills that might save us, or at least make the time in the lifeboat more bearable. Now is the time to reach out to them, to make the connections and strengthen them. Because trust me, you'll end up in the lifeboat with someone, no matter what, and you should do your best to get along with them, care for them, even if they're consumed by fears you don't understand. They probably won't understand your fears either, and that means you both have a great opportunity to work on communication. Shipwrecks as a tool for personal growth aren't much fun, though, so I ask you again to take a moment to consider who's in your lifeboat. And then just one more thing, which was lifeboat ethics. This is from harveker.com, or Iker, Harveker. And I thought this was good to include. In our lifeboat ethics experiment, a vast majority of people who chose others to live, they gave up their seats, did so because the people they chose to live were able to articulate specific value in some kind of way, the contributions they would make not only to themselves, but also to the world. The criteria for such a choice were the clarity with which they were able to state their case and the commitment to their purpose. And he says here, don't ever let someone try to take your seat from you. I'm not talking about Hunger Games, fight to the last person standing. I'm saying coming from an authentic place where you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to contribute to the world, and why it's important that either you or your mission, bigger than you, needs to live. There's only one entity that can take your life from you, and that's the one, capital O-N-E, that gave it to you in the first place. It's not up to you or anybody else to take you out. Your contribution is essential. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be breathing right now. Nobody takes your seat again. Okay, now it's your turn. Given the same choices as our volunteers in lifeboat ethics, would you still give up your seat? For what reasons? Remember, there are no right or wrong answers. Now, questions about who you'd want in your lifeboat. Well, I asked ahead of time, just as I went along in the last days, I asked various friends this question and enjoyed the ensuing answers, conversations around that. One friend and listener here in Rhode Island said the very first person would be a singer, and then a storyteller, among others, including a best friend. I especially love the choice of a singer and storyteller, no surprise, to soothe and soften everyone's spirits. Absolutely. Another friend, a Christian scientist, also another friend up in Maine, I'll mention one more, said he'd want Jesus in his boat, with the added benefit he could walk on the water. How about that? A couple in Maine that I know, up in Owl's Head, Angela, wife, replied, it was more important to choose people who could perform well under pressure, more so than by their skills. She also said, not her husband, who was sitting there, because he'd get, quote, too panicky. And he agreed. Well, a younger local friend asked back to me, do I have to have anyone else? Because I'd rather be alone and not have to deal with other people. I was not expecting that. That was good. That was an interesting answer. Faithful friend and listener in California said, definitely Bear Gillis, an Olympic survivalist, that it'd be an adventure no matter what, even if we didn't survive, to be with him. Also, he'd want to have a flute, he said, to play to the whales. Someone I know in Florida, actually just today, said Tarzan and King Kong. Well, imagine that scene. I know I'd want a great sailor. I am a good sailor, but a really great sailor. A good fisherman, and an ER doctor. But those aside, definitely a soul brother or soul sister to support each other deeply and lovingly on the Odyssey. Whatever that Odyssey is, however long. So, who would you want in your lifeboat? If you could choose only a few other people, maybe 3 others, 3 or 4. In some twist of fate, a ship sinking you're a passenger on, casting you into an actual lifeboat at sea, or in some dire lifeboat-like circumstances on land, some extreme conditions where you have to survive until you're rescued or get to safety. Maybe this is something you've never thought about. Have you thought about it? Well, if you haven't contemplated it, maybe it's worth thinking about who you could really depend on, put your life in the hands of, and for what qualities and other reasons. What about people you wouldn't want in your boat? Maybe no politicians, and no whiners, or any high-anxiety types. Maybe not. And what would make someone want to include you in theirs? Assuming, of course, you're not someone the rest of the boatmates, your boatmates would want to throw overboard, give the old heave-ho to. If you're listening, and I doubt you're one of those people. Quite the contrary. Well, from the Writer's Almanac. In 1916, Sir Ernest Shackleton, if you've heard of him, set out in a lifeboat. He was the famous Antarctic explorer. He came to mind in his ill-fated expedition. Well, semi-ill-fated. But miraculous in the surviving story, the survivors, despite the wildest hardships imaginable. There's a couple of good books out on this, but this is just a capsule about it. So in 1916, he set out in a lifeboat from Elephant Island to get help for his shipwrecked Antarctic expedition. He had set sail from London on the Endurance in August 1914, intending to be the first party to cross the continent of Antarctica. 4 months later, the ship encountered pack ice, large masses of ice not attached to land for the first time. They crossed the Antarctic Circle in 1915, but the ship was trapped in the ice pack. The crew had no control over the vessel's movements, drifted aimlessly along with the ice for more than 9 months. Eventually, the Endurance was so damaged by the ice that Shackleton ordered his men to abandon ship. Each man was allowed to bring only 2 pounds of personal items from the ship, with 2 exceptions. Photographer Frank Hurley's photographic plates, thank goodness we have those, and crew member Leonard Hussey's banjo. They set up camp on an ice floe where they watched their ship gradually sink into the frigid waters. They camped on the ice for months, hoping they would hit a lucky current, drift north to safety, but finally in 1916, Shackleton and some of the men set off in 3 lifeboats. They landed on Elephant Island, which was uninhabited. A few days later, Shackleton set off in one of the lifeboats, the James Caird, to South Georgia Island, where there was a whaling station. In August, he finally arrived at the ice camp, rescued the survivors, one of whom later wrote, quote, "I felt jolly near blubbing for a bit and could not speak for several minutes when he saw Shackleton's ship appear on the horizon." quite an adventure story, a true adventure story. Well, then I found, to go with that, a poem by T.R. Hummer, Shackleton's Biscuit. Of ox and luncheon tongue, 600 pounds. Of Wiltshire bacon, 7/10 of a ton. 1,700 miles they walked, and it was pony meat that saved them. But one biscuit, this one of thousands, baked by Huntley and Palmer's, a special formulation fortified with milk protein, survives. The men long dead, and the ponies whose lives flew through bullet holes easily over the frozen labyrinth of the Fortuna Glacier, all gone to powder. Found a century later in the wrecked larder of one of Shackleton's way stations, it remains perfectly nutritious and sold at a Christie's auction, is worth 1,000 some sterling. We had seen God in his splendors, we had reached the naked soul of man, he wrote, and this biscuit, said a Christie's director, is an object that really catches the imagination. Shackleton's Biscuit. Thank you, T.R. Hummer. Actually, thinking about that, I'm also reminded that I read that one of those way stations, 100 years later, was discovered under the floorboards to be, I believe, 100 cases of whiskey in case they got there and needed it. So they auctioned off all the whiskey, and one case was bought by a distillery in Scotland. It was cases of single malt whiskey, and they figured out how to reverse engineer it and make a Shackleton whiskey, which you can buy. I have a bottle here, and I've had it, and it's quite good. It's quite good. I was also thinking about the Titanic, as you might have been thinking about, or are, and the lifeboats, because that was part of the story. They played a crucial role. This is from Wikipedia. In the sinking of the Titanic on April 1912, the ship had 20 lifeboats that in total could accommodate 1,178 people, a little over half of the 2,209 on board the night it sank. Many only carried half their maximum capacity. There are many versions as to the reasoning behind the half-filled lifeboats. As they rowed away from the ship, they were too far away for other passengers to reach, and most did not return to the wreck due to a fear of being swamped by drowning victims. Some of whom later died, of course. The closest ship to respond to the distress signals was the RMS Carpathia, reached the lifeboats hours after the Titanic had sunk to the bottom, and they continued until the last lifeboat was collected. I cannot remember one of the earlier films, the black and white films, and the band played on is actually, I think, the British film about that sinking. Beautiful film, way before the blockbuster James Cameron film, and I think more poignant to me. But of course, I'm a vintage movie buff too. Thought you might be interested, as I was, about to just a little glint on the evolution of the lifeboat. This is from CondenastTraveler.com. Lifeboats have evolved from simple vessels launched from shore to double-decker mini-ships that carry hundreds of people, but their function, the last line of defense against the sea, remains unchanged. So the first ones, in 1789, ship ran aground off the coast of England, and the crew died within sight of shore. The tragedy inspired local businessmen to create the original 30-foot double-ended boat with 10 oars that could be used as a rescue vessel. Cork in the hull prevented capsizing, but it had one major drawback. It was useful only in accidents that occurred near shore, but it did save countless lives and inspire the onboard lifeboats that were put into use about a century later. And they mention the current ones are since 2012 and that period since then. Look gargantuan and invincible compared with their antecedents. Lifeboats on large cruise ships can hold up to 250 passengers in an enclosed deck. Some even have 2 levels. No need to row. Diesel engines follow coordinates set by an onboard GPS sonar and weather data and deliver coordinates to rescue vessels. They're designed to automatically right in rough seas. Well, how about that? Far cry from those others and from the castaways in Hitchcock's Lifeboat. And I'm thinking, of course, of the earlier Lifeboat as I talk through our theme and our stories and comments and poems. Okay. David Wagner. Water music for the progress of love in a life raft down the Sammamish slough. Slipping at long last from the shore, we waved to no one in a house with a dismantled chimney, a sprung gate, and 5 bare windows. and begin this excursion under thorny vines, trailing like streamers over the main stream in our inflated life raft, bluer and yellower than the sky and sun which hold the day together. My love, upstream, be the eyes behind me, saying yes and no. I'm manning the short oars which must carry us with the current or without it 6 miles to our pasture. There go the mallards patched with gray and white by their tame feathers. Down from the leaves the kingfishers branching go raucous under the willows, and out of sight the star-backed salmon are waiting for the rain to rise above us. And the wind is sending our raft like a water spider skimming over the surface. We begin our lesson here, our slight, slow progress, sitting face to face, able to touch our hands or soaking feet, but not to kiss, as long as we must wait at opposite ends, keeping our balance. Our spirits cold as the Sammamish mud, our tempers rising among the drifts like the last of the rainbows rising through the remaining hours till the sun goes out. What have I done to us? I offer these strands, these unromantic strains, unable to give such royal accompaniment as horns on the Thames or bronze bells on the Nile or the pipes of goatmen. But here, the goats themselves in the dying reeds, the ringing cows and bullocks on the banks, pausing to stare at our confluence along the awkward passage through the bridge, over love's divisions, landing at nightfall, letting the air run out of what constrained us. We folded together, crossing stem to stern, search for our eyes, and reach ourselves in time to wake again this music from silence. I like that because it was also about a different use of a life raft altogether. Love raft, I guess we could say. I also found, I thought you'd find this intriguing, from the War Department, the United States War Department, April 1944, FM 21-22, Basic Field Manual on Watermanship. And it's a couple little bits from this about how to survive in a lifeboat. Back then, the thoughts about that. This manual covers everything a man needs to know to survive at sea. Survival depends on everyone carrying out routine tasks cheerfully and promptly, sharing hardships equally and without complaint. Among the many different suggestions or directions, ration water and food, set a definite course and maintain it. Maintain morale and faith, schedule and conduct or supervise regular periods of worship, if circumstances permit. Water. Man can exist only about 7 days without water. Do not drink salt water. Never drink urine. Never forget this. If water is not available, do not eat. Rainwater. Use cups, tin cans, sea anchor, boat cover, sail, strips of clean clothing, and all canvas gear in the boat to collect rainwater. Food. Special food should be kept to bolster morale in gloomy periods. In one lifeboat from the Robin Moore, biscuit crumbs moistened with cold water, seasoned with seawater, and mixed with canned tomatoes provided a feast which raised morale considerably. Birds. All birds are good to eat, cooked or raw. Their blood and livers are also edible. Catch every bird you can. Use the feathers to make fishing jigs or stuff them under your clothing for warmth. Seaweed. Certain kinds may be eaten, but not unless you have plenty of water. Chew it well. Seaweed often holds small fish, which can be eaten. Discard jellyfish, which are poisonous, and crabs, which are too salty. Fish are attracted by light and may jump into the boat toward a flashlight or the reflection of the moon on a white object hung in the boat. Did not know that. Clouds. Clouds and certain distinctive reflections in the sky are the most reliable indications of land. Birds and insects. An increase in the number of birds and insects indicates land nearby. Odors. Land odors are carried out to sea by the wind. Detection of such odors in fog, mist, rain, or at night is very important, as you may be drifting past a nearby shore without seeing it. Watch. Maintain a continuous watch aboard lifeboat, raft, or float. This is similar to sentry duty. The person on watch looks for rescue parties, steers the boat to prevent its capsizing, maintains designated course, or changes it as necessary. And don't drink up all the water and eat all the food, even if it appears that rescue is possible. And don't consider yourself rescued until you're actually aboard the other craft or are placed under the orders of our commander. So that's that War Field Manual from 1944. Bob Hickok has this piece, Learning to Swim. At 48, To be given water, which is most of the world, given life in water, which is most of me, given ease, which is most of what I lack here, where walls don't part to my hands, is to be born as of 3 weeks ago, taking nothing from you, mother, or you, sky, or you, mountain, that you wouldn't take if offered by the sea, any sea, or river, any river, or the pool beside which a woman sits, who would save me if I needed saving, in a red suit, as if flame is the color of emergency, as I do, need saving from solid things, most of all, their dissolve. Learning to swim. Thank you, Bob Hickok. Yeah, the idea, the notion, the mental and visceral associations we have. I imagine you have around life-saving, different kinds, around rescue. So a few poems to do with that, to share with you here this week. This is Erin Evans, Inpatient. My husband holds the cold stethoscope to my chest. His brown eyes averted, he listens carefully, like someone taking directions on the phone on how to save another life. My heart is a room full of dispatchers waiting for those strange hour desperate calls, trained to keep you on the line while help arrives. But what he says, smiling up at me after he's listened a while, is, "I think I can hear the ocean." And I know he must be right, that what he hears is some small part of the 95% of water on Earth yet to be explored, that there is still no word for life that doesn't sound like the hush of the ocean. Thank you, Erin Evans, Inpatient. Maxine Kumin, Kumin, or Kumin. Nurture. From a documentary on marsupials, I learned that a pillowcase makes a fine substitute pouch for an orphan kangaroo. I am drawn to such dramas of animal rescue. They are warm in the throat. I suffer, the critic proclaims, from an overabundance of maternal genes. Bring me your fallen fledgling, your bummer lamb. Lead the abused, the starvelings, into my barn. Advise the hunted deer to leap into my corn. And had there been a wild child, filthy and fierce as a ferret, he is called in one 19th century account a wild child to love, it is safe to assume, given my fireside inked with paw prints, there would have been room. Think of the language we two, same and not same, might have constructed from sign, scratch, grimace, grunt, vowel. Laughter, our first noun, and our long verb, howl. Thank you. Maxine Kumin. Louise Erdrich, or Erdrich, Captivity. It has a quote in it from the narrative of the captivity of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, who was taken prisoner by the Wampanoag natives when Lancaster, Massachusetts, was destroyed in the year of 1676. He, my captor, gave me a biscuit, which I put in my pocket, and not daring to eat it, buried it under a log, fearing he had put something in it to make me love him. Captivity. The stream was swift, and so cold I thought I would be sliced in two. But he dragged me from the flood by the ends of my hair. I had grown to recognize his face. I could distinguish it from others. There were times I feared I understood his language, which was not human, and I knelt to pray for strength. We were pursued by God's agents or pitch devils, I do not know. Only that we must march. Their guns were loaded with swan shot. I could not suckle, and my child's wail put them in danger. He had a woman with teeth black and glittering. She fed the child milk of acorns. The forest closed, the light deepened. I told myself that I would starve before I took food from his hands, but I did not starve. One night he killed a deer with a young one in her and gave me to eat of the fawn. It was so tender, the bones like the stems of flowers, that I followed where he took me. The night was thick. He cut the cord that bound me to the tree. After that the birds mocked, shadows gaped and roared, and the trees flung down their sharpened lashes. He did not notice God's wrath. God blasted fire from half-buried stumps. I hid my face in my dress, fearing he would burn us all, but this too passed. Rescued, I see no truth in things. My husband drives a thick wedge through the earth. Still it shuts to him year after year. My child is fed of the first wheat. I lay myself to sleep on a Holland lace pillow bier. I lay to sleep, and in the dark I see myself as I was outside their circle. They knelt on deerskins, some with sticks, and he led his company in the noise, until I could no longer bear the thought of how I was. I stripped a branch and struck the earth, in time, begging it to open to admit me as he was, and feed me honey from the rock. Thank you, Louise Erdrich. Very interesting. New to me. Captivity. Well, here's a piece of mine from New York City, back in October of 2005, near the neighborhood I lived in, the Upper West Side of New York. This was over by Riverside Drive, Riverside Park. As I was musing on material, including about those who dedicated their lives to saving others, and at times losing their own in the effort, in the bargain, like firemen, like firefighters, and soldiers. Monumental men. Legions of firemen stand underwater on Riverside and West End, soaked to the blue of their brass-buttoned coats and stiff round hats, as they line the streets in the drenching rain to commemorate all the firemen now under stone, those fallen into the flames of history and the quiet of memory. Monumental men who, too, stood here once to honor their heroes. W.S.D. Piero, Walt the Wounded, and he's referring to Walt Whitman and his service to care for the wounded in the American Civil War. The whole world was there, plucking their linen, half-bald, mumbling, sucking on their mustache tips. Broadway was still in business, and they asked no favors. All the cracked ribs of Fredericksburg, the boys who held their tongues at Chancellorsville, as the bandages, mule shit, skin, and shot overran the Rappahannock's banks and poured it in our mouths that summer. He sat up half the night reading to the Army of the Potomac, poems about trooping goats and crazy fathers chewing grass in the wilderness. It's me that saved his life, dear mother. He had dysentery, bronchitis, and something else the doctors couldn't properly diagnose. He's no different than the others. I bring them letter paper, envelopes, oranges, tobacco, jellies, arrowroot, ginger snaps, and shin plasters. Last night I was lucky enough to have ice cream for them all, and they love me each and every one. The early teachers stretched on canvas cots with their bad grammar, backs smeared by caissons, a heap of arms and legs junked beneath a tree. About a load for a one-horse cart. At night, campfires peaked by shebangs in the bush. He'd find the stage drivers laid up here. Broadway Joe, George Storms, Pop Rice, Handley Fish, Old Elephant and his brother Young Elephant, who came later, Yellow Joe, Julep Tarn, Tick Finn, and Patsy D. The pinched khaki drifting down the gangways, homecomers looking for those not waiting there, bamboo lays and punji sticks alive in their dreams. A small fire still burns in the nursery. Rice and molasses simmer on the stove. Children will have to learn to ask for less from the elephant dawn that chilled across the heights where Lee held his ground. The sky curled its wrath about the land, and they brought America's fire home. Fire on our hands, ashes at Bull Run, buckets from Pleiku, while he stood watching on the shore, pulling his beard. America seems to me now, though only in her youth, but brought already here, feeble, bandaged, and bloody in hospital. Our roughed-up beauties dead or dying. He sang them good night with his hands in his pockets. Who would have kissed them and warmed their flesh forever? When Oscar F. Wilbur asked if he enjoyed religion, perhaps not, my dear, in the way you mean, and yet maybe it is the same thing. To worship the fire in the nursery, fire in the hills, and in the mouths of those I love, I do know why our wounded died. I do know. I know. Thank you, W.S. Piero. Liesold Müller has this poem beginning with 1914, obviously about World War I. Wars of, and I'm thinking, with you here, wars of modern times where places where so many were literally or figuratively in need of lifeboats, from clusters of people, refugees, to whole villages, cities, even countries. And here we are again in our world. These major things are happening yet again. So I chose a couple of poems here I felt fitting in that way. And this is one of them, Liesold Müller's poem, beginning with 1914. Since it always begins in the unlikeliest place, we start in an obsolete country on no current map. The camera glides over flower beds, for this is a southern climate. We focus on medals, a horse, on a white uniform, for this is June. The young man waves to the people lining the road. He lifts a child. He catches a rose from a wrinkled woman in a blue kerchief. Then we hear shots and close in on a casket draped in the Austrian flag. 31 days torn off the calendar. Bombs on Belgrade. Then Europe explodes. We watch the trenches filled with men, the air with live ammunition, a close-up of a 5-year-old living on turnips. Her older sister, my not yet mother, already wearing my daughter's eyes, is reading a letter as we cut to a young man with thick glasses who lies in a trench and writes a study of Ibsen. I recognize him. He's going to be my father. And this is his way of keeping alive. Snow, blood, lice, frostbite, grenades, stretchers, coffins, snow, telegrams with black borders. On the wide screen, my father returns, bringing his brother's body. My mother's father brings back his sons from the opposite edge. They come together under the oaks of the cemetery. And who will be my family are here, except my sister, who is not yet imagined. Neither am I, who imagined this picture, who now jump to my snowy birthday in the year of the 1,000,000-mark loaf of bread. My early years are played by a blue-eyed child who grows up quickly, for this is a film of highlights. Like all documentaries false to the life, the work of selective memory, all I can bear of a painful childhood. The swastika appears and remains as the huge backdrop against which we're seen. The soundtrack of a hysterical voice is threatening us. We're heard as whispers. Shortly before my city bursts into flames, my stand-in disappears from the film, which continues with scenes of terror and death I can't bear to watch. I pick up a new reel, a strange sequel, set in a different location and made in another language, in which I am back. The colors are bright, the soundtrack is filled with music, the focus gentle. A man is beside me. Time-lapse photography picks up the inch-meal growth of daughters toward the sky, the slow subversion of dark by gray hair. Little happens. The camera sums up the even flow of many years in a shot of a river. The principles from part 1 are missing, except for me, who am the connection. The time is now, and I am playing myself. Thank you, Lisa Muller. Another new-to-me poem. Here's one about World War II by H.R. Hayes. The Liberators. We were the liberators, lent from tomorrow. Today was too small for us. Our bleeding stars set in the eyes of spring. Our burning arrows pierced the child and the mother, pierced the seed unsown. There were wings in our voice, full of wind and rivers, music acceptable to the grass. Out of air and poverty we built our ladders to moons that never were, enchanted galaxies, fierce lovers of wheat, ploughmen of anger, husbands of history. Across maps we thundered. The people, stepping out of doorways, stirred like a field full of flowers. Across clouds and horizons, saluted by leaves and planets, minerals, ears of corn, suns in our hair. Pockets full of winter, lips full of summer. Sky on our shoulders, we spoke to the people. At the foot of the wall we lay, dressed in stone, veiled in iron. Our severed tongues cried out from the dust, our heads rolled into your nights, eyes still staring at colors beyond the spectrum. We ground our bitter bones for your bread, our furious blood cements your capitals, out of our rich decay your gilded banners. Always we died in victory, we ascended as we fell. Silence is always loud with our hearts. In the country of time we are taller than earthly obelisks. We are nourished on memory. Our sons, when they enter the valley, when the earth is sulfur and acid and gangrene, when they walk on rivers of fire, when they pluck handfuls of death, mark well our tremendous footprints. Thank you, H.R. Hayes. I did not ever read that before, and it's and praise and thanks to all the liberators across time and history in our world. I'm wondering if you were thinking about someone I was thinking about around lifeboats. The man who wrote the big bestseller about a boy and a tiger in a lifeboat, Jan Martel, from Salamanca, Spain, born in 1963. His father was a Canadian diplomat, and he grew up in Alaska, British Columbia, Costa Rica, France, Ontario, and Mexico. He was feeling burnt out. This is from the Writer's Almanac, by the way. And he had no idea what to do with his life, so he went to India, where he felt even worse. He was lonely, tried to write a novel, but it failed. He left Bombay for Matharan, a quiet hill station where old motor vehicles were outlawed. And it was there, sitting on a boulder, that he suddenly thought of a book review he had read many years ago. It was by a Brazilian writer, and its premise was that a German Jewish family who owned a zoo tried to escape to Brazil, but the ship ended up sinking, and one family member was left alone in a lifeboat with a black panther. He loved the premise, and he made it his own. Went back to Canada and wrote a story about an Indian teenager named Pai Patel, who calls himself a Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, son of a zookeeper, and his family leaves India for Canada to begin life there. Shipwrecked, ends up in a lifeboat with a few animals and eventually only a tiger named Richard Parker. It was published in 2001, The Life of Pi, and became a bestseller and won the Booker Prize. Well, how about that? So even if we land up with a tiger or a panther in our lifeboat, we can manage, miraculously manage. Okay. I want to keep us in time. I have so many other good things. I'm going to pass on this next one for another time, one of mine. I might even pass on John Ashbery's poem. It's a very interesting poem, and I'm just going to point you to it. John Ashbery, Ashbery, single R. The One Thing That Can Save America. Yeah, very good. Good piece. But I will share with you Darius Daughtry's poem, What Can a Poem Do? Because this is our last handful of sharings now. A poem cannot save a life, cannot Luke cage your skin, fend off a dark alley attack, cannot make you less woman or less poor or less black, and thus treated equally. A poem cannot stop a bullet, stop a bomb, stop terror on your doorstep, your step, even with poem in hand. Could be your last. A blast would turn the paper poem is written on into dust, particles, simile up in smoke, metaphors just molecules forgotten. A poem cannot turn back time's hand, erase mistakes made, or cut, copy, paste memories. A poem cannot delete history's horrors, but a poem can love, like hold you and scold you at the same time. A poem can rip away the untruths that have cocooned us. A poem can make you butterfly, not fly. You already fly, but a poem can make you float. No need to watch your step. Quiet as kept, a poem can introduce you to yourself, help you discover those hidden, forbidden parts. A poem be like a mirror sometimes, help you see the crust in your eyes, and the plank. On second thought, a poem can save a life, like wise words Granddaddy whispered, like the layer of truth just below the scriptures. A poem cannot stop a bullet, but can swallow the hate and spit back a sonnet. That sonic booms a room till quotes float like balloons, goblins and goons soon just nod their heads, snap their fingers to what's written and said. Isn't it ironic? They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but there were few writers on my block, mostly fighters on my block, dropouts that pulled all-nighters on my block. They'd blue and red light us on my block. They'd then indict us on my block. What if there were more writers on my block, on your block? In every barrio and borough, conclave and commonwealth, courtroom and Capitol Hill. What if they all spilled ink on pages, allowed the inner workings of their hearts to scribble a poem or two? I wonder where we'd be if the masses knew just what a poem could do. Thank you, Darius Daughtry. Another new one. I like that. It's true. Amazing what poems can do. Poetry. And the poetics of living, of course, which I talk to you often about if you're often listening. It's a bit of an autobiographical piece of mine, actually, from January of 2019. It's after The Ancient Mariner, the rhyme of The Ancient Mariner. The poet all at sea. How a poet, having passed the known line, was driven by storms to a foreign pole of dark shores, and how from that lost place he made his course true north, to a latitude of great light, and of the curious things that came to pass on his depthful voyage, and in what manner the poet came to his truest sense and place of belonging. That's me, friends, that's me. Rumi said, he had these words back in time, the old poet, Be a lamp or a lifeboat or a ladder. Help someone's soul heal. Walk out of your house like a shepherd. David White's very soulful poem, soulful to me, maybe to you, if you haven't heard it before. The true love, one word. There is a faith in loving fiercely the one who is rightfully yours, especially if you have waited years, and especially if part of you never believed you could deserve this loved and beckoning hand held out to you this way. I am thinking of faith now, and the testaments of loneliness, and what we feel we are worthy of in this world. Years ago, in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the grey stones to the shore of the baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. And I think of the story of the storm, and everyone waking and seeing the distant yet familiar figure far across the water calling to them, and how we are all preparing for that abrupt waking and that calling, and that moment we have to say yes, except it will not come so grandly, so biblically, but more subtly and intimately, in the face of the one you know you have to love. So that when we finally step out of the boat toward them, we find everything holds us and confirms our courage. And if you wanted to drown, you could, but you don't. Because finally, after all the struggle and all the years, you don't want to anymore. You've simply had enough of drowning. And you want to live, and you want to love, and you will walk across any territory and any darkness, however fluid and however dangerous, to take the one hand you know belongs in yours. Thank you, David White, the true love. How much do you want to live in love, friends? And are you taking the one hand that greatly, truly belongs in yours? Right, next to last. Interesting how we often look outside for a hero when we have one right inside. In the most essential way, the only one we, I would say, ultimately need and can summon. You are the hero of your story, the one to brave the way, to risk and pave your way, the one to rise from your depths to your heights, dimensions far greater than you realize, ever thought or were told you had. To summon the courage to live or ease or save your only life. For only you can. Yes, you are the hero. That heroic being already waiting in the wings. And last for now, for our time together this week until a next time, how you survive whatever fate may befall you. Shipwreck to home wreck, country or world wreck, you can survive by manning with all your heart, wits, and grit the life-worthy boat you live in, the life-going vessel of flesh and blood, bone and spirit that has brought you this far, has served you all this way. The boat that can, with care, with bottomless trust, keep you afloat and bring you through even the hardest times, the darkest times, into a safe, sure, and welcome harbor. Thank you again, friends, for leaning in and thinking and feeling in and sharing this boat ride together, this lifeboat ride. Thanks, too, for sharing these shows with others. You can post the program link or the whole playlist out to your friends or social media so we can bring more listeners aboard. I do invite your comments, suggestions, and questions, and any donations you'd like to make to help support my work bringing these broadcasts to you. If there's a theme you'd like me to do a broadcast on, send me an email, colin@thepoetorialist.com. And what about your experience of this show? On who do you want in your lifeboat? I'd like to hear. I really would. If you are sending a contribution, you can do that simply by Venmo to Fivefold, Fivefold, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or you can mail a check along to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or donate through my site, thepoetorialist.com, by way of the Donate tab. I can be sponsored or privately hosted as a working poet in residence in the U.S. or elsewhere to create a new flight of poetic art and dedicate it to a patron or sponsor. You can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube, on the Floating Poetry playlist, and you can follow the portal of possibility I'm guiding that's launching this summer, the Poetosphere. Go to thepoetosphere.com, the POETISPHERE.com for a preview of what's ahead. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, may you sail through your days with ease. But give thought to the lifeboat, should you ever need one in your life, and who best and dependably belongs in it with you, and help you and each other get through any epic life-on-the-line trials you may face. Feel, too, into the life saver that matters most of all, yourself, and the great resilience you have within can summon, can discover, and help you save the day in any times of great need. On that note, never forget, you are far greater than any of your life challenges. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.